So, as she said, I'm originally from Trinidad and Tobago. Has anyone ever been there? I know someone is from there in the audience. There you go, over there. Yeah? Yes? So it's a lovely island. It was a wonderful place for my childhood and for going to university, and I actually never wanted to leave. But then I was really interested, for various reasons, and I'll get into in a minute, in neuroscience and so on. So I then moved to Germany in order to further my studies. And you can imagine going from here to here was a little bit tough. Definitely temperature-wise, but also emotionally, it was very difficult for me to be so far away from my family. And actually, this is my bicycle here with the tray, with the snow on it. It was rough. It was cold. I was already freezing in September, and it only got worse and worse until December. So I moved to Germany to do my master's and then my Ph.D., and I did it at the Max Planck Institute in Germany. So this is a really amazing place. There are 40 Nobel Prize winners from the city that I studied in. Yeah, so it was some of them were actually our lecturers and teachers. So it was really an amazing place to study and to grow. And in addition to getting my PhD, I also got a husband and 2 kids. So it was a pretty great program. And actually, my son is in the little one is in the back. Daniel, he's in the back today. So while living in Germany, you can imagine it was pretty expensive for my parents to fly me home. And also because I was so homesick, they didn't want to fly me home too often because they were afraid I wouldn't want to go back. But this guy here, this is before Facebook and good cameras to take nice pictures. So this is like a picture of a picture, so it's a little bit dark. But these are my grandparents, this is my grandfather, and he was one of my biggest supporters when I was growing up. I was, of all the cousins, I was a little nerdy one. You know, I didn't want to play some of the games they were playing. I would be by his feet with my book, or like scratching his hair, oiling his feet. You know, so we were very close. And while I was in Germany studying, because of miscommunication between his doctors and the medication that he was getting, he got a stroke, which was totally avoidable. And when he got that stroke, so he's actually 6'4", and so is my husband actually, so tall, big, strong guy. And he was like a force. My grandmother was very quiet, but he was the kind of the life of the family. And to see him go from being this strong, amazing man to becoming a baby again from the stroke was just devastating for me. And going home once a year, his decline was gradual, but for me, I would see him in 1 year, and then a year would pass and I would see him again. So for me, it was very traumatic. I didn't see the gradual, I just saw from 1 year to the next how quickly in my eyes he declined. And in the end, you know, he was wearing diapers, he couldn't speak anymore, he didn't recognize me anymore. So it was really difficult, and he actually died on one of my visits. They said he was waiting for me to come back to pass away. So it was very difficult for me going through this process, and also trying to guide my parents through my mom losing her father from something that could have been completely avoided. So as a result, which is part of why I do this, is because we need advocates. We need to be advocates for ourselves. When you go to the doctor, don't just take the red pill or the blue pill, or you don't know what dose or what it's for. And often, you know, we don't ask enough questions when we go there. Because I was like, well, why didn't you ask? Why didn't they have his records? Why didn't they talk? So this is part of why I do this, because in guiding my family through it and making them understand genetics and medication and genes and everything that's going on, I felt it's also part of my duty to give back to my community, to educate as much as I can about what's happening. So that's kind of why I'm here. Thank you. Okay, so that's a little bit about my history, which also kind of helps to get me calm and not as nervous before I start talking about the actual stuff. So, this is the outline of the talk I'll give. So I'll first talk about our aging world. I'll talk a little bit about what we know about Alzheimer's disease and how the disease works. Then I'll take a step back to talk about the normal brain, and then how that looks as opposed to the diseased brain, which is what happens with Alzheimer's. And then I'll talk about our genes, and one of the genes that predisposes us to getting Alzheimer's disease, which is a gene called APOE4. And I'll talk a little bit about, you know, how the genes work and what this protein does. I'll touch a bit on the research, some of the drugs that are currently available, and then what we can do to prevent this disease from happening. So this is our world today. Can you see well? Yours is okay? So this is our world today. The areas in blue are the countries that currently have 20% of their population over the age of 65. So if you know some of your geography here, this is, does anyone know? Japan, exactly. And this is Scandinavia and Western Europe. This is how it looks currently. This is how it's going to look in the year 2050. So you can see how much of the world is covered in blue. And this is because our population is aging. We're all living longer and longer, which is a good thing. You know, previously you would not have gotten to know your grandparents and your great-grandparents. My grandmother's at 92, still alive, so my son has gotten to know her. Usually, in the past, this was not possible because we weren't living as long. So this, on the one hand, is a very good thing. We all get to live longer, hopefully have full, enriched lives. But with this increase in age comes a couple of problems. So for a long, long time, this is how our society and our world look. So we had a pretty large population from 0 to about, let's say 44, which was a base of a pyramid supporting the older population, taking care of the older population, paying into Social Security so that people can retire, have benefits when they retire. So this is how our society was built and how it's been sustained pretty much up until in the last recent few years. This is how it looks today. So you can see that the base is shrinking, people are having fewer and fewer kids. The middle portion is expanding, but the fastest growing area is up here, over 60 and up. And this is how it's going to look in 2050. We're having even less children. In some countries, including Germany, where I used to live, they're actually going into negative population because they're not having any kid, or one. So actually, oh, is this okay? In Germany, you actually get money when you have a baby until that kid is 18. Sometimes I wonder why I left, right? Because the social services are really, really great over there. But yeah, so people are having fewer and fewer kids, and the aging population is really expanding. So this is where I'd ask you to, if it starts playing, to just pause it. Can you pause? Okay, great. So I just want to explain this before I let. So if we are looking in the background here, this number is the year that we're looking at. So in this snapshot, we're looking at the year 1819. On this axis is life expectancy. So, and this axis here is the number of children per woman. Each of these circles represents a certain part of the world. So in yellow, you have the Americas, right? In red, you have Asia. In orange, you have Europe and Russia. In dark blue, sub-Saharan Africa. In light green, Northern Africa. Yes? So if we look at this snapshot in 1819, you can see that the life expectancy was about 35. And women were having between 4 and 8 kids. This was like with my grandparents. On both sides, my mom has 7 siblings, my dad has 8, which I think was pretty common, right, to have relatively big families. Now I have 2 kids, and that's a lot. Okay? So, I don't know how people do it with 8 and 9. But then families also live closer together, supported each other. I'm out here on my own with my husband, so it's a little bit different. But, so at this snapshot of 1819, again, life expectancy was about 35, and people were having an average of 6 kids. So if you can play it now, what you'll see start happening is that time is going to be running in the background. So you start seeing, as time goes past, people are starting to have fewer kids in Europe, and now in the Americas, and we're starting to live longer and longer. So it's slowly progressing. So this is around the war, the end of the war. It's moving towards this side. This is the advances in modern medicine. It's all moving this way. Everyone is moving up and across. Yeah? So now it's going to stop at 2010. Everyone is over here. So you can see the Americas, Europe, Asia, India, everyone is up here. So we're all living longer and longer, but we're having very few kids, right? The only country where the life expectancy is still a little bit low is sub-Saharan Africa, and this is because of the HIV/AIDS epidemic that has happened there. But this is also changing now because of advances in modern medicine and education about AIDS and the spread of AIDS. So this has also shifted in the last 6 years, okay? Now, I don't know, I was trying to find an African-American song that reflects this, but I couldn't find one, so I found one from the Stones. Do you know this song? You guys know this song? Yeah. So, I mean, it's in a sense, they are kind of what we want, right? Because, I mean, how old are these guys? And they're still rocking out. So they're in their 70s, right? Are they still touring? Yeah, right? So this, in a way, is what we want. To live and to rock out and to have a great life until you're however old, and to keep enjoying life. In this song that they sang, it talks about what a drag it is getting old, and this is why. So, as we get older, and this axis now is your age in years, so 65 to 69, 70 to 74, and so on, going on to 95. And on this axis here, you have cases of Alzheimer's disease. And you can see here, once you cross 65 and start going, your chances of getting diseases, and Alzheimer's is just one of them, goes up exponentially. And it's partially because we weren't really made to stick around this long, right? You were made to have your childhood, childbearing age, have some kids, raise them that they can be more or less okay, and you're done. Whereas we're raising them, sometimes raising their children, right? Living longer and longer and longer. So once you cross a certain age, a lot of things start happening in your body. So and this axis is just for Alzheimer's, but this can be swapped out for many types of cancer. For osteoporosis, especially for us women, for retinal disease, for glaucoma, all of these diseases, the likelihood of them happening starts to increase as we get older and older. Now, some of the things that have changed because of science and because of advocacy, which is really important, is, especially if you're looking at the cancers, and especially if you're looking at HIV, I think, is one of the main ones, which is what you see here, is that these diseases have killed millions of people, but often because their survivors, or the people who survive the disease itself, and also their family members, a lot of these diseases take people down in the prime of their life, right? So there has been a lot of research and money and energy put into finding cures for many of these diseases. And especially with HIV, the advocates have been out there marching, going to Congress, fighting with the pharmaceutical companies to find cures for their loved ones. Look at Alzheimer's. It's the only disease of all the major killers where there's no change in the number of deaths, and actually it's only getting more and more. Part of this is because it's the disease of the old. So it's kind of, I think, previously seen as a natural part of aging. Yeah, she's losing her mind, she's losing her memory. But it does not have to be that way. So this is where we come in, where we have to do the research, we have to find the funding, we have to be advocates for our older loved ones to make sure that this stops happening. So, the way we can do that is by a number of ways. Number one is called precision medicine. Any of you have heard about Angelina Jolie, who had the double mastectomy? So in her case, it's because she found out she had a gene, and this was because of her family history. So I think her mom and an aunt had breast cancer. So she went and she found out about her genetic background and saw that she had the gene that predisposed her to getting breast cancer. So as a result, she was proactive and just removed the tissue that would potentially get cancerous to prevent it from happening. So that's what precision medicine means: knowing your genes, knowing your family history, and having medicine to treat you personally, right? And this is, again, is being proactive in your own medicine and your health and your treatment. We also need new treatments for Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, ALS, osteoporosis, and then not only getting new treatments for it, but better ways of detecting who is at risk for what, and finding that out early before you're well into the course of the disease. So government funding, as we all know, especially on age-related diseases, is very small. So we need academia, which is where I used to work, the private sector, which is where I now work, to step up to try to translate basic research discoveries into validated targets and then effective therapeutics, so that the discoveries that we make in the lab can then be translated to the clinic to help people. So let's talk a little bit about Alzheimer's disease itself. Are you guys okay on all the background? So it's the most common devastating form of dementia. Does everyone know the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's? No. So dementia is more of an umbrella term, which means that you lose the ability to carry out your life in the way that you would do so traditionally. Memory loss is just a part of that. So it's your inability to function, to dress yourself, to do your banking and your accounting, your finance, to maintain the relationships you used to have. This is all like in a general umbrella of dementia. It's a slow deterioration of your ability to carry out your daily activities. Alzheimer's disease is one disease that leads to dementia. Vascular disease is another disease that can lead to dementia. Stroke is another disease that you can have that can lead to dementia. So dementia is like the umbrella, and there are many different diseases or traumatic brain injuries. So if you get a really bad knock to your head, these are different ways that can then lead to dementia. Is that okay? So, yes, it's the most common devastating form of dementia. It currently affects 5.3 million Americans, and this number will double in 10 years and then more than triple to 15 million by 2050. So the impact on families, of course, cannot be measured in dollars, but if we were to put a dollar value on it, and this was done in 2010, it's currently costing the US $172 billion to take care of Alzheimer's disease patients. And not only to take care of the patients themselves, but to take care of the caregivers. Because in taking care of your loved ones, you're not working, you're often getting sick yourself. So the trickle down is huge. So not just the patient and the care for the patients, but also the caregivers and the families. So this cost is going to increase by 85% by 2030. And unfortunately, presently there's no effective medication that would cure or reverse the cognitive decline that we see with Alzheimer's disease. So what are some of the characteristics of this disease? It's progressive, and it's a degenerative brain disease with a gradual onset, which is usually characterized by memory loss. So this is what most people think of when they think of Alzheimer's, losing your memory, which is what happens in the beginning. And this happens because of atrophy or loss of brain cells in specific parts of the brain, and I'll get into this in a minute. This atrophy or death of brain cells happens because of two main things, which is the development of plaques and tangles. Have you guys heard of these plaques in Alzheimer's disease when people talk about the disease? Yeah? And it also because of a depletion in neurotransmitter, which is how brain cells talk to each other. So the cells, the way they talk to each other is not efficient anymore, and then the cells themselves also die. And this is how if you were to take a brain sample from someone without Alzheimer's, this would be clear. This is a sample from someone with Alzheimer's showing these plaques and these tangles. Okay, so let's talk about the healthy brain first so that you can kind of understand how your brain should work and then how it no longer works properly in Alzheimer's. So your brain is your most powerful and complex organ in your body. It controls your emotions, it helps you to think, to feel, and you can basically say that your brain is you, or your memories are you, right? So because the way in which you think about someone, the way that you feel about this person is all based on your memories of that person, right? So the lobes of the brain is made up of different parts. So this here is to the front by your forehead, and this is to the back of your head here. So the different lobes are responsible for different things. So kind of the top is for attention, touch, pain, temperature, spatial and visual perception, and your interpretation of language and words, which is this part of your brain. The very back is your occipital lobe. So your eyes can be fine, but if you got really bad to the back of your head, you can be blind. Because the part of your brain that's responsible for vision is to the back of your head. That's here. The frontal lobe is for planning, judgment, thinking, emotion, speech, personality, and intelligence. This is the part that's most developed in humans compared to any other animal, and it's kind of what makes us human. And then the temporal lobe, which is where Alzheimer's starts, is responsible for memory, hearing, and understanding language. So it starts off in this area, and then gradually spreads to all of the other parts of the brain. And then, so that's kind of like the outer part of your brain, and then if you go deeper inside, some other structures called the hypothalamus, which is to regulate your body functions, so your heartbeat, your breathing, and stuff like that. The amygdala, this is where all of your emotions and your anger resides. Right? So if you get pissed off, this is the part that's kind of responsible for that. Your hippocampus, which is your memory, so you see how close that is to your emotions. Those two are really tightly coupled, so you might see somebody and immediately get pissed based on the memory that you have. That's because these two are coupled right here. Or be really happy when you see somebody. So different parts of your brain are very discrete, where they are responsible for different functions, but then all of these different parts talk to each other. right? So if one part starts breaking down, it affects other parts of the brain. So part of how we know what all these different parts of the brain do, and especially one particular part, which is the hippocampus, which is for your memory, came because of this guy here. So while I was doing my PhD, he was still alive, so we just referred to him as patient HM to protect his identity. He passed away, I actually have it in my notes that I don't have available to me. Oh! I usually have my computer next to me and I have notes in there and it's over there now, so I have it as a crutch sometimes. So he passed away in 2008, thank you. And when he did, they released his identity, so he was Henry Gustav Molaison. So he had a bicycle accident when he was quite young, under the age of 10, and as a result developed really bad epilepsy. So his mother took him to a number of different doctors to try to find a treatment for it. And medication wasn't working and so on. So in the end, they decided that the best course of treatment was to surgically remove the part of the brain that was causing the epilepsy, which is actually still done today. If you can't control your epilepsy with medication, sometimes they do go in and take the part of the brain out that's causing it. So that's what they did with him. And what happened is that he developed complete inability to form new memories when they took that part of his brain out, complete. So as a result, he worked with scientists for the remainder of his life because it was just amazing to meet this man. I really wish I could have met him. So it would be a situation where he would come in and say, hi, what's your name? Don. Nice to meet you, Don. A second later, hi. What's your name? Don. Can you imagine that? Never being able to form a new memory from your early 20s until he passed away, right? So because of this, studied for years and years and years, and then they realized that it's, number one, it's bad to take this part of your brain out because you will never form a new memory again, but also that there are different types of memory. So he could remember everything before the surgery, but nothing after the surgery. So that there are two different types of memory, long-term and short-term, before things happen and kind of after, subsequently to something happening. They also did different tests with him while he was alive. So one of the tests they would do would be to walk and talk with him and walk through a maze. So he had no memory of doing that maze, but after doing it over and over, he learned the maze, even though he didn't know he was doing the maze. So that showed that there's also a separate type of memory for things that you become used to, like a motor memory, like driving. The first time you drive somewhere, well, now we have Waze and Google Maps, and which we can cheat with, right? But let's say you did know that. You would print out the thing, you would be looking for your landmarks, and you would try to find your way there. The second time you drive, it might be a little bit easier because you know Safeway's on the corner. The third time, you know, okay, this is the exit, and then Safeway's on the corner, and then you're there. And by the fifth time you drive, you don't need your navigation, you don't really even need to look where Safeway is, you just go. So that's a different type of memory. So based on this guy, we knew that short-term memory is gone if you lose your hippocampus, but there are different types of memory. And the reason I'm really talking about this part of the brain is because in Alzheimer's, the hippocampus, which is here in a normal brain, is the first thing to go, and is basically completely gone by the end if someone dies from Alzheimer's disease. So this is a normal brain. This is that hippocampus area I was talking about that helps you to remember and to form new memories. This is the brain of someone who has passed away from Alzheimer's. So if you just look at the top one, you can see there are a lot bigger spaces in between. This is because of death of all of those brain cells. And if you take a slice, you would just take a slice out of it here and lie it down on the side, you can see that the hippocampus is almost completely gone. But it's not just the hippocampus, right, which is for the memories. Look at all of the other parts. So this person has massive dementia, not just memory loss, but everything else that goes along with it. They've lost a lot of what made them them because of this brain disease. So this is what happens. So this is a brain cell, this is how it looks, and these are how these cells talk to each other. For example, this is a cell body, which is the main part of the cell, and then they have these long arms called axons, where they talk to other cells. So some of these are very short in the brain, and some are very long. So for example, a cell that goes from your brain down to the tip of your finger is very, very long compared to one that's just within the brain, right? And then the area where these talk to each other, it's called a synapse. And this is what I was working on in my PhD, how these cells talk to each other, how this works. These little dots in here is the signaling from one cell to the other. And then the focus of what I was working on completely changed when my grandfather had his stroke, to stop thinking about, just how these talk to each other to why they die and can't talk to each other anymore. So this is, again, showing a normal cell. So these are two brain cells, again, talking to each other, one here and one here, sending out these axons and dendrites to kind of communicate. But when you have Alzheimer's disease, these cells are not healthy anymore. So you have the development of plaque. It's kind of like garbage. So it's like if the garbage truck stops working and the garbage is piling up in the street, so your ability to go from Oakland to Berkeley is disrupted because of all this garbage in the street. So that's basically what's happening here. So you don't have transport anymore, and it disrupts and kills the cells from the outside. And then we have APOE4, which is what I'll be talking about, which kills the cells from the inside. So before I go into APOE4, can I have a time check? How am I doing on time? I'm okay? So before I talk about the genes themselves, I want to make sure we're all on the same page with respect to genetic inheritance and how that works. So of course, we all have a mother and a father, and as a kid, you're a mixture of 50% of your genes from your mom and 50% from your dad. So if there's a particular gene, let's use BRCA, the gene that causes breast cancer, right? So you can have an unaffected father because he has one good gene and one bad gene. The good one is in green, the bad one's in pink. And the mother is also just a carrier, a good one and a bad one. When the kids are getting the 50-50, you can both get the breeds, like this. You can get one green from your mom and then one pink from your dad, like this. Or you can get two pinks, like this, right? So in getting genes, you get 50% from one side, 50% from the other side. So that's just in general about genetic inheritance and how it works, right? So when we're talking about our genes particularly, we have a higher incidence and rate of late onset Alzheimer's disease compared to whites living in the same community. And part of this is because of our genes. Because we are often at a higher risk for developing vascular disease, which are disorders affecting the circulatory system. So even though that we all live in the same community, may have the same diet, may have the same lifestyle, our genes would play a different role in our susceptibility to getting a disease or not getting it. So APOE, which is the main one that I'll talk about today, is the strongest genetic factor for Alzheimer's disease. And as I said, this alone does not explain the frequency of Alzheimer's appearing in our population, but it's one of the major drivers of Alzheimer's. So what does APOE do? So there are two main types of APOE, like as I said, you get like one from your mom, one from your dad, right? And this gene is common, we all have it. And there are two types, one called APOE3, which is a good one, and one called APOE4, which is the bad one. It's the abnormal form and it's associated with Alzheimer's. And it's actually not rare, so 25% of the population has this gene. So there are four of us to the front here, me, Don, Joe, and Miranda. Four of us. If it's a 25%, means that one of us has it. That's how common it is. So for every 4 people, one of you would have it. Okay? No. I hope not me too. So while in the general population, it's only 25%, so 1 in 4, if you take all of the Alzheimer's disease patients, so everyone who actually has Alzheimer's, within that patient population, it's enriched. So 65 to 80%, or most of the people with Alzheimer's actually have this gene, because the gene is driving you to get it, right? So having this gene not only increases your risk of getting it, it doesn't say you're 100% sure that you're going to get it. You can have APOE4 and not get the disease, but it increases your risk of getting it. And it also decreases the age of onset. So if you don't have APOE4, again, we weren't meant to stick around quite as long as we are. So even if you don't have this gene, between 75 and 80, you still have a chance of developing Alzheimer's, just from some other factor. If you have this gene, this age goes down dramatically. So already at 65, we start seeing people with Alzheimer's disease because of this gene. And then it affects men and women differently. So if you have the good form, as I said, there's still a chance that you get it. But if you have the bad form, if you're a woman, you're 4 times more likely to get it, and if you're a man, double. So not only as African Americans, we have different factors driving us getting the disease in addition to APOE as women. And women African Americans, we have an even higher chance of getting it. Which is why we really need to take care of our health, okay? And if you have 2 copies, one from your mom and one from your dad, if you're a man, you're 10-fold more likely to get it, and a woman 12-fold. So the likelihood is very high that you get it. So that's how APOE might affect your brain cells. So if you have something bad happening to you, such as head trauma, so if you have a car accident, if you're a boxer, not good, football player. If you have poor oxygen delivery, so this is like stroke, or unfortunately, living a long, long time is also damaging to your brain. So if you have any of these, it causes neuronal damage. And then the function of APOE is to help to repair and protect your nerves. So I kind of explained this. Do you guys know the Roomba? It's like a vacuum cleaner that you can switch it on and it drives around by itself and cleans. So that's kind of what this protein does. The gene gives rise to the protein, which is your Roomba. You put it on your house and it cleans your house and you don't have to do anything. It's just doing its business. If you have APOE4, it's like a broken Roomba that is spitting out dust and knocking stuff over. So you put the Roomba on, it knocks over your lamp, breaks the lamp, it knocks into the thing, chips your desk with your TV on it. So it's supposed to be doing a good job, but because it's defective, while it sucks up dust, it spews out more dust, it causes allergies, it causes all kinds of issues. So this is what's happening with APOE4. It's supposed to be there to do a good job, to clean up, but it's not doing its job properly. So in addition to not cleaning like it should, it's also causing injury. And this then leads to Alzheimer's disease. And then this is kind of a little bit more detail of how it's doing this, right? So you have these injuries happening, aging, brain disease, stroke, and the protein is kind of there to transport cholesterol, which is like fat, which kind of helps your brain cells to maintain their structure and their form and to communicate with each other. And that's how the protein should work. But it doesn't work properly, as I said, so as a result, you have damage in your brain. And one of the ways that we figured out how this protein is working is by using animal models, which is how I do my work, because I can't experiment on humans, obviously. So to be able to figure out what's happening with some of these diseases, we have to use animal models to do it. So you can imagine a mouse is much smaller. Let me go back to this one. The brain of a mouse, or rodent, or rat, is much smaller than a human. But we have a lot of things in common. Some of the things are very similar. And one of the things that's similar is our ability to make memories and remember things that happened. So the same way we have this hippocampus here, which is responsible for memories, rats also have it there, right? So we can use this to be able to figure out how memory works and the role that APOE plays in memory formation. So what we did is that we made mice, basically, that have the good APOE, the good working Roomba, and the bad working Roomba. And then we could test these animals to see if they could form memories properly. So for example, we trained them in something called a water maze. So usually when you think of a maze, you think of kind of like a flat square with little grids in it to be able to navigate, right? So it's kind of like that, but in this case it's with water because mice or rats have a really good sense of smell. So if you put them in multiple times, they could just smell where they were before. Whereas smell in water, it doesn't transfer. So we train them in this, and we train them to find a hidden platform. And based on that, you can kind of figure out if they have memory issues or not. Kind of like you trying to find your way here this morning, right? Or then remembering where you parked your car outside, stuff like that. So we can do the same thing with rodents. So the way we do it is by, can you press play? Can you press play? Okay. So here, this is actually a really good friend of mine. So she's doing this test. So we have this big tank of water. You put the powder in there, so it's clear, it's white, so the animal can't see this platform, which is right under the surface here. And then over time, you train these animals. They're really good swimmers. They don't like it though, so they're very motivated to get out. So you train them to go and sit down, and they swim and they go and sit down and they wait for you to take them out, right? So if you put an animal with APOE3, which is the good one, in, after training her for a while, she swims and she finds it quickly. That's like you finding your way to work after you've been driving there for a long time, no problem. If you put an animal in, so it's like, bam, swim straight to the point. If you put a rat in or a mouse that has APOE4, this is someone with memory problems, right? You know you put your car somewhere in the parking lot, but you didn't remember the color, the floor, the number, and this is you. Floor 3, where's the car, right? Even though you should know because you usually park there all the time. So basically the same thing that happens in humans, we can see happening in animals. So these animal models are what we use then to try to figure out how these proteins work, how these genes work to give us these problems, and then to find drugs to be able to rescue the problems. So part of the reason why this APOE rump doesn't work is because the structure of E3 and E4 are different. So APOE3, you don't really need to remember all the details of this stuff here. This is just trying to explain some of the genetics. The APOE3 is kind of shaped like this. This is the good Roomba, driving around, picking up the dust, not knocking into anything. This is the bad one, which is closed. And as a result of the wrong structure, it doesn't perform its function properly. So what I was trying to do while I was still at the Gladstone was to try to find small molecules or drugs that can change the shape of the Roomba. So change the APOE4, the bad one, which is closed, to an APOE3-like molecule, and that would then help it to function again properly. So a lot of the work that we were doing was trying to find drugs, doing chemistry and so on, to find a drug that would take this bad shape, which is closed, and the drug would kind of fit in here and open this up to make it more similar to the APOE3. So that even if you have this, thank you, that it will function properly. So I'll just skip past this for a second. So this is where we were in the drug discovery process of trying to find drugs that could change the structure, but you can see the time that it takes to just develop a drug, just in a lab. This is not even going to clinical trials. So this is also part of why a lot of drugs cost a lot of money, and people think, the pharmaceutical companies are bad because they charge so much money, but it's because of the length of time and money that goes into the development of a drug. The animal models, figuring out what that drug is, testing the drug for a couple of years to make sure it's safe, and then going into clinical trials, which then costs millions of dollars before it can come to the market so that we can actually take it. So this is just like a snapshot of how long that process takes. In addition to that drug that we were working on, there are a couple of other drugs which are on the market currently that I'd just like to touch on so that you guys kind of understand how they work. So before, these brain cells talk to each other. And one of the things that happens in Alzheimer's is that you don't have enough of these chemicals here that are talking to each other. They don't work anymore. So some of the drugs on the market kind of target the cells so that they can talk to each other a little bit better. Some of the other drugs target these amyloid plaques, so the garbage that's junking up your road so that you can't transport anymore, to try to get rid of them. This here, all of the drugs that are in clinical trials. So there are a lot of different clinical trials going on for many different types of drugs. And all of these circles that you see, I'm not sure what's going on here, are all failures. Just take that. Hello? So all of these drugs in all of these circles up here are drugs that are in different phases of clinical trials, and most of these drugs have failed. The only ones that currently work are these, and work is in quotations, because I know a lot of you guys have family members who may have tried some of these drugs. These are the only ones that currently are on the market, and these don't stop the disease, they don't prevent it. They just help to alleviate symptoms, and they only work in some patients and only very early on. So this is basically saying that we need to do a lot more work, we need to raise a lot more money to try to find more drugs that kind of make it into this center circle here that goes to the clinic. Yeah?
Is there a drug that slows it down though?
No.
Slows it? They say it is.
There are drugs that alleviate the symptoms, which means that if you're having memory problems early in the disease and you take these drugs, some of those memory problems will go away, and that's because they help with the chemicals where the cells are talking to each other. But the disease itself, it's still progressing in your brain. So it's slowing or preventing some of the symptoms that you see in talking to your family member, but the disease itself is still progressing, which is why after a while those drugs don't work anymore, because the cells themselves die.
You have heard of that AirSat, though?
Yes, I have, and that's the one I'm actually talking about.
Okay.
That helps in the beginning, but it only helps in early or mild Alzheimer's. So if you give this drug to someone who has late Alzheimer's, it won't work anymore, just because the brain cells are not even there that you can help them to talk to each other.
What are the three that are in the inner circle?
So one of them is called denisopil, that's actually Aricept. The other one is called rivastigmine, glutamin, oh, I can't even read it properly up here. But most of these are more for, as I said, very mild Alzheimer's, and they don't work very well. So the only one that really works well is denisopil or Aricept. Okay, so this I kind of touched on before, that as African Americans, we have a higher % risk of getting other diseases too. And one of them is diabetes, which is because of our diet often. And these are things that can be prevented. So when I talk then about prevention, which is kind of what I'm kind of going to go into here just very quickly, these are things that we can do to help prevent Alzheimer's disease from happening. One of them is genetic testing. This is a little bit of a question mark. As I said, there are no drugs that can slow it, stop it, prevent it. So finding out you have APOE4, you can, but what do you do with that information, right? If knowing something like that can really drive you to exercise, eat right, maintain your social circle, etc., then definitely yes. If knowing that information would stress you out, like it would me, then maybe you should find out, right? Because there's no drug that you can take. Doing brain scans and so on, testing doing a spinal tap or biomarkers, these are all things that you can do to identify your risk early. But again, for Alzheimer's, it's a question of whether or not you want to do that. And then this is what you can do to prevent Alzheimer's. Whatever is good for your heart is good for your head. So being heart healthy, exercising, avoiding cardiovascular disease, avoiding obesity and diabetes. Brain stimulation, this is a big one. Staying engaged, learning something new, increasing your education as much as possible, and novelty. This is a really big one in keeping engaged, because often, and this kind of ties into this one here with your social and emotional well-being, after retirement, your social circle shrinks significantly. Sometimes in a good way, sometimes in a bad way. I mean, the people you work with, you might not want to see them anymore, so that's a good way. But the bad way is that you interact with far fewer people than you used to when you were working. So these two, maintaining your education, learning new things, and maintaining your social circle is really important to preventing Alzheimer's. And this for us as caregivers and younger family members, to maintain your older family members in the family circuit is very, very important to preventing this disease from happening. And then of course, as I mentioned a couple of times, your nutrition. And there's been some research that has shown that a glass of wine doesn't hurt. Bread and one. Okay? Now obviously you don't want to go overboard with the alcohol because that's not good and will cause some other issues, right? And then I stopped drinking coffee while I was in college because I was a little bit addicted to it. And then I saw a study came out, so some science they did, and they saw that people drinking coffee had lower incidence of Alzheimer's, so I started back. But again, I have 1 cup, 1 a day, so there are things that you can do to help to prevent this disease from coming. Okay, and that's it.